Picture this. You work double shifts as a nurse practitioner for 3 years, eating instant ramen and skipping vacations, all to save $127,000. Then your parents call you crying because they're about to lose the family home. Without hesitation, you hand over every penny you've saved. 3 months later, you walk into that same house and find your sister measuring the living room for new furniture. When you ask what's going on, she casually says, "Oh, Mom and Dad didn't tell you. They're giving me the house as a wedding gift." That's exactly what happened to me. I'm Emma, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most will take the biggest advantage of that love. Let me paint you a picture of my family. There's my dad, Robert, who's 58 and spent 30 years building houses with his own two hands. He's the kind of man who taught me that hard work pays off and that family comes first, no matter what. Then there's my mom, Linda, 56, who worked as a school secretary but always dreamed of being the mother of a successful, beautiful daughter who would give her grandchildren and make her proud at church gatherings. The problem is, I was never that daughter. That role belonged to my sister Madison. Madison is 3 years younger than me, and from the moment she could walk, she was the golden child. While I was getting my first job at 14 to help pay for school clothes, Madison was taking dance lessons that cost more than our monthly grocery budget. When I graduated high school, my parents threw me a small party at home with a store-bought cake. When Madison graduated, they rented out the community center and invited half the town. But here's the thing about being the responsible daughter in a family like mine. You don't do it for recognition. You do it because you love them, and because someone has to be the rock when everything falls apart. And boy, did everything fall apart. 6 months ago, I got the phone call that changed everything. It was 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I was just finishing a 14-hour shift at the hospital when my phone rang. It was Dad, and I could immediately tell he'd been crying. "Emma, honey, we need to talk to you about something serious." My heart dropped. In our family, serious conversations at 11 p.m. usually meant someone was sick or dying. But this was different. This was worse in some ways. "We're going to lose the house, Em." The house. The 3-bedroom ranch where Madison and I had grown up, where Mom had marked our heights on the kitchen door frame every birthday, where Dad had built a treehouse in the backyard that we were both too scared to actually sleep in, where every Christmas morning had happened, every family dinner, every fight and makeup and milestone. Dad's construction business had gone under. After the economic downturn, nobody was building new houses, and the contracts he had fell through one by one. They'd been using credit cards to pay the mortgage for 8 months, hoping things would turn around. Now they owed $127,000, and the bank had given them 30 days before foreclosure proceedings began. I remember sitting in my car in that hospital parking lot, still wearing my scrubs, listening to my father, the strongest man I knew, sob into the phone. Mom got on and tried to sound hopeful, saying they were looking into options. Maybe they could sell and downsize. Maybe Dad could find work with another construction company. But I knew what I had to do. I had exactly $127,000 in my savings account. It was supposed to be the down payment on my first house, my escape plan, my ticket to finally building a life that was mine and mine alone. I'd been looking at condos, dreaming about having my own space where I could paint the walls whatever color I wanted and not worry about anyone else's opinion. "Mom, Dad," I said, interrupting their planning, "I'm going to pay it off." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Emma, honey, we can't let you do that," Dad whispered. "You're not letting me do anything," I replied. "I'm choosing to do this. You're my parents. This is what family does." I had no idea that those words, "this is what family does," would come back to haunt me in the most devastating way possible. Because 3 months later, I would learn that apparently family doesn't include me the way I thought it did. 3 months later, I would discover that in my family, I wasn't the daughter. I was just the bank. Let me tell you how I became the family bank without even realizing it was happening. Growing up, I was always the one who solved problems. When Madison lost her retainer for the 3rd time, guess who used her babysitting money to replace it? When Dad's truck broke down and he couldn't afford the repair, guess who picked up extra shifts at the grocery store to help with the payment? When Mom needed someone to drive her to doctor's appointments because she was too anxious to go alone, Guess who rearranged her college class schedule? I became a nurse practitioner because I genuinely wanted to help people. But if I'm being honest, it also felt like the practical choice. Madison was studying art therapy, a beautiful field that pays about as much as you'd expect. Someone in our family needed to have a stable career, good insurance, and the ability to handle emergencies. That someone was always going to be me. While Madison spent her 20s traveling to Bali for yoga retreats and posting Instagram photos from music festivals, I was working 12-hour shifts at St. Mary's Hospital, coming home to a studio apartment that I barely decorated because I was never there long enough to enjoy it. Every paycheck, I'd put aside whatever I could into my savings account. $20 here, $50 there, sometimes a whole $100 when I picked up an extra weekend shift. I had a vision board on my refrigerator with pictures of houses I wanted to buy. Nothing fancy. Just a small 2-bedroom place with a yard where I could maybe get a dog. I'd drive through neighborhoods on my days off, imagining what it would feel like to have my own space, my own rules, my own life that wasn't centered around fixing everyone else's problems. But here's what I didn't understand then. In families like mine, there's an unspoken rule. The responsible child doesn't get to have dreams that compete with the family's needs. The responsible child's money isn't really their money, it's the family's emergency fund. Madison, meanwhile, had just gotten engaged to Jake, this guy she met at a wellness retreat in Colorado. Jake's nice enough. He works in marketing for some tech company and seems to genuinely adore Madison. Their engagement photos look like something out of a magazine, all flowing dresses and golden hour lighting. Madison posted them with captions about finding her soulmate and starting the next chapter. I was happy for her, I really was. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a tiny part of me that wondered when it would be my turn to be celebrated instead of just being the one who made celebrations possible for everyone else. The night my parents called about losing the house, I was meal prepping for the week. Chicken and rice portions that would last me until Friday, because that's how I'd managed to save so much money. I was listening to a podcast about real estate investing, dreaming about finally making an offer on this cute house I'd been watching online for months. When Dad broke down crying on the phone, explaining how his business had failed and how they were facing foreclosure, something inside me just clicked. This wasn't even a decision I had to think about. Of course I was going to give them the money. Of course I was going to sacrifice my house fund to save theirs. That's what daughters do, right? I remember calling the bank the next morning to arrange the wire transfer. The representative asked me 3 times if I was sure about withdrawing my entire savings account. "This is a large amount, Miss Emma. Are you certain this is what you want to do?" I laughed and told her it was fine, that I was helping my parents. She paused and said something that should have been a warning. "Well, I hope they appreciate what you're doing for them." The day I handed my parents the cashier's check, Mom cried and hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. Dad kept shaking his head, saying he couldn't believe he had raised such an incredible daughter. Madison sent me a text that said, "Thank you for saving Mom and Dad's house. You're amazing, sis." For exactly 3 months, I felt like I had done something truly meaningful with my life. I had saved my family's home. I had kept our history intact. I had proven that all those years of being responsible and reliable had been worth it. I thought I had finally earned my place as the daughter who deserved their gratitude and respect. I had no idea I had actually just proven that I would always be the daughter who could be taken advantage of. The day I wired that money to pay off my parents' mortgage was one of the best days of my life. I remember driving to their house afterward, knowing I was about to deliver the news that would save everything they had worked for. When I walked through the front door, Dad was sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of foreclosure papers, his head in his hands. Mom was pacing around the kitchen, stress cleaning the same counter over and over again. "Mom, Dad," I said, pulling the receipt from the wire transfer out of my purse. "It's done. The house is paid off." The silence that followed was deafening. Dad looked up at me with these red, exhausted eyes, and for a moment I thought he didn't understand what I was saying. "Emma, what do you mean it's paid off?" Mom whispered. "I paid the full amount this morning, $127,000. The bank confirmed it. You're not losing the house." What happened next is something I'll remember for the rest of my life. Dad started crying, not the quiet tears from our phone call, but full-body sobs. He stood up and hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. Mom joined in, and for the first time in months, I felt like I had done something that truly mattered. "You saved us, Emma," Dad kept repeating. "You actually saved us." That weekend, we had a family dinner to celebrate. Nothing fancy, just Mom's famous lasagna and a store-bought cake that said, "Thank you, Emma," in blue frosting. Madison came over with Jake, and even she seemed genuinely grateful. She gave me this long hug and said, "I don't know how we got so lucky to have you as a sister." For 3 months, everything felt perfect. My parents seemed lighter, happier. Dad started talking about maybe starting a small handyman business. Mom was sleeping better at night. I was eating a lot of ramen and instant mac and cheese, but seeing them stress-free made every sacrifice worth it. Then Madison announced her engagement to Jake was official, and they were planning a summer wedding. The family was thrilled. Madison had always been the one who would give our parents the traditional wedding they'd dreamed of hosting, the grandchildren they'd brag about, the son-in-law who'd become part of family gatherings. But as wedding planning intensified, something started to feel off. My parents would stop talking when I walked into rooms. They'd exchange these loaded glances when Madison brought up wedding venues or guest lists. When I asked if everything was okay, they'd brush off my concerns. "We're just excited about the wedding," Mom would say. "Nothing for you to worry about." 3 months after I'd saved their house, I decided to surprise them with groceries. I'd gotten my first decent paycheck since emptying my savings account, and I wanted to buy them a nice dinner. Steaks, fresh vegetables, maybe even a bottle of wine to celebrate how far we'd all come. I used my key to let myself in, arms full of grocery bags, calling out, "Mom, Dad, I brought dinner." But the voices I heard coming from the living room weren't my parents. It was Madison and Jake, and they were discussing paint colors. "I think we should go with the sage green in the master bedroom," Madison was saying. "It'll look amazing with the new furniture we picked out." "Are you sure we want to change this much?" Jake asked. "I mean, it's your parents' house." "Actually," Madison laughed, "it's going to be our house. Mom and Dad are giving it to us as a wedding gift. We're moving in right after the honeymoon." I dropped the grocery bags. Literally dropped them. A jar of pasta sauce shattered on the hardwood floor that I had helped save, and the sound made both Madison and Jake turn around. "Oh, hey, Emma," Madison said cheerfully, like she hadn't just announced that my parents were giving away the house I'd paid for. "I thought you were working today." "Madison," I said, my voice barely steady, "what did you just say about the house?" "Oh, didn't Mom and Dad tell you? They're giving us the house as a wedding present. It makes sense, right? Jake and I need a place to start our married life, and Mom and Dad are ready to downsize." The world tilted. Everything I thought I understood about my family, about the sacrifice I'd made, about what that money had actually purchased, crumbled in an instant. I had saved their house, but apparently it was never really theirs to save. I stood there in my parents' living room, staring at my sister who was casually discussing renovations to the house I'd saved, and I felt something inside me break. Not just my heart, though that was definitely shattered, but something deeper. My understanding of who I was in this family, what my sacrifice had meant, what love was supposed to look like. "Where are Mom and Dad?" I asked Madison, my voice eerily calm. "They went to look at apartments," she said, still measuring the window for new curtains. "They're excited about downsizing. Mom said she's tired of taking care of such a big house." Jake looked uncomfortable. He kept glancing between Madison and me like he could sense the tension building. "Madison, maybe we should wait for your parents to get back before we—" "It's fine," Madison interrupted. "Emma, you look upset. Are you okay?" "Am I okay?" I wanted to scream. Instead, I pulled out my phone and called my parents. Dad answered on the second ring. "Emma, honey, what's up?" "Dad, I need you and Mom to come home right now. We need to talk." "Is everything all right? You sound—" "Just come home, please." 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. I sat on the couch that I had helped save while Madison and Jake awkwardly continued their measuring, as if pretending this was normal would somehow make it normal. When my parents finally walked through the door, the guilt on their faces told me everything I needed to know. "Emma," Mom started, "we were going to tell you—" "When?" I stood up, my hands shaking. When exactly were you planning to tell me that you were giving away the house I paid for? Dad cleared his throat. Sweetheart, it's more complicated than that. No, Dad, it's actually very simple. 3 months ago, you called me crying because you were going to lose this house. I gave you every penny I had saved, $127,000, to pay off your mortgage. Now you're giving that house to Madison as a wedding present. What part of that is complicated? The room was silent except for the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. Mom sat down heavily in her chair. Emma, you have to understand, Madison is starting a new life. She and Jake need stability. You're 28 and single. You'll be fine on your own. You always are. I'm fine on my own? I repeated, my voice getting louder. Mom, I gave up my dream of buying my own house to save yours. I've been eating instant noodles for 3 months because I spent my entire savings on your mortgage. We didn't ask you to do that, Mom said defensively. The words hit me like a physical blow. You didn't ask me? Dad literally sobbed on the phone about losing the family home. You both cried when I gave you that money. You threw me a party with a cake that said, "Thank you, Emma." Dad looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Emma, we appreciate what you did, we really do. But Madison deserves more than you do. She's always been special, and what am I interrupted. Mom's next words will haunt me forever. You're our backup, Emma. You're our safety net. Madison is our future, our legacy. She needs this house for her marriage. You're strong. You'll figure something else out. You always do. Our backup? Our safety net? Not their daughter. Not someone whose dreams mattered. Just the reliable one who would always be there to fix their problems and then quietly disappear when it was time to celebrate. I left that house without saying another word. I drove straight home and sat in my empty studio apartment, staring at the vision board on my refrigerator with pictures of houses I would never be able to afford now. That's when I started researching property law. I discovered that when you pay off someone's mortgage with the understanding that they'll retain ownership and then they transfer that property without your consent, you have legal standing as a creditor. The house couldn't legally be transferred to Madison without addressing my financial interest in the property. I found a lawyer who specialized in family property disputes. She listened to my story and shook her head. Emma, she said, your parents can't just give away a house that you have a financial stake in. You essentially have an informal lien on that property. That night, I made the decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to be the family backup anymore. I spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about what I was going to do. Part of me wanted to just walk away, to be the bigger person, to let Madison have the house and chalk it up to an expensive lesson about family dynamics. But every time I closed my eyes, I heard my mother's voice saying, "You're our backup, Emma. You're our safety net." Number I was done being anyone's backup plan. On Thursday morning, I called First National Bank and asked to speak with their legal department. When they transferred me, I took a deep breath and said the words that would change everything. Hi, my name is Emma Rodriguez, and I need to report a potential fraud involving a property transfer. 3 months ago, I paid off the entire mortgage on a house owned by Robert and Linda Rodriguez. That's $127,000. I made this payment with the understanding that they would retain ownership of the property. Now I've discovered they're attempting to transfer the deed to a third party without my knowledge or consent. The woman on the other end of the line, who introduced herself as Janet from legal, immediately became very interested in my situation. Ms. Rodriguez, when you paid off this mortgage, was there any written agreement about your financial interest in the property? No, I admitted. It was a family emergency. I trusted them. I understand, but the law is clear on this. When someone pays off a mortgage on property they don't own, they establish what's called an equitable lien. The property cannot be legally transferred without addressing that lien. Can you provide documentation of your payment? I had everything. Bank statements, wire transfer receipts, even text messages from my parents thanking me for saving their house. Janet reviewed my case and confirmed what my lawyer had told me. My parents legally could not give away a house that I had a financial stake in. We're going to have to freeze any pending deed transfers and send a notice to the current property owners, Janet explained. If they can't resolve your claim within 10 business days, we'll have to initiate foreclosure proceedings to protect our interests as the lending institution. What does that mean exactly? I asked, even though part of me already knew. It means if they can't pay you back the $127,000 or get your written consent for the transfer, they'll have to vacate the property while we sort out the legal ownership. I hung up the phone and immediately felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't just about teaching my family a lesson anymore. This was about potentially making them homeless. But then I remembered sitting in that living room, listening to my mother explain that Madison deserved more than I did. I remembered all the times I'd sacrificed for this family, all the times I'd been taken for granted, all the times my needs had come second to Madison's wants. 5 days later, my parents received a certified letter from the bank. Mom called me screaming, "Emma, what did you do? The bank is saying they can't transfer the house to Madison because of some lien. They're saying we have 10 days to resolve it or they're starting foreclosure proceedings." "I protected my investment, Mom," I said calmly. "You can't give away a house that I have a financial interest in." "This is insane," she yelled. "You're destroying Madison's wedding. You're destroying our family." "No, Mom. You destroyed our family when you decided I was worth less than Madison. You destroyed our family when you called me your backup plan." Dad got on the phone, and for the first time in my life, he sounded angry with me. "Emma, you need to fix this right now. Call the bank and tell them it was a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake, Dad. You accepted my money when you needed it, and now you're trying to give away what I saved without even consulting me. I'm not fixing anything." The 10 days passed without any resolution. My parents kept calling, alternating between begging and threatening. Madison sent me a series of texts calling me vindictive and selfish, saying I was ruining her future. Jake even called once, asking if we could work something out because Madison was having panic attacks about losing the house. On day 10, the eviction notice was served. At 3 p.m. on a Tuesday, a sheriff's deputy knocked on the door of the house I had saved and handed my parents a legal document that gave them 48 hours to vacate the premises. The bank was reclaiming the property until the ownership dispute could be resolved in court. Mom called me one last time that day, sobbing. "Emma, please, we'll lose everything. All our furniture, all our memories, everything." "You should have thought about that," I said, "before you decided I didn't matter." 3 months after I'd saved their house, my parents were being evicted from it, and I was the one who'd made the call that set it all in motion. Watching my parents pack their belongings into a rented U-Haul truck was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I sat in my car across the street knowing I had the power to stop all of this with one phone call, but also knowing that making that call would mean going back to being the family doormat forever. Madison was there, crying and dramatically throwing clothes into garbage bags. Jake looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. Dad moved slowly, like he'd aged 10 years in 10 days. But it was Mom who broke my heart the most. She kept looking at the house like she was memorizing it, touching the doorframe where she'd marked our heights as kids. That's when my phone rang. It was Dad. "Emma, please, I'm begging you. Your mother is having chest pains. The stress is killing her. Just call the bank and fix this." For a moment, I almost did it, but then I remembered something my lawyer had told me. "Emma, if you cave now, they'll know they can manipulate you forever. You're not just fighting for this house, you're fighting for your right to be treated as an equal." "Dad," I said, I'll call the bank under one condition. We go to family mediation, and you acknowledge publicly what I did for this family." 3 days later, we sat in a mediator's office. The mediator, a patient woman named Doctor, Sarah Chen, listened to our entire story without judgment. When we finished, she looked at my parents and said something that still gives me chills. "Robert and Linda, I want you to understand something. Emma didn't just give you money. She gave you her future. And instead of honoring that sacrifice, you treated her like a transaction. You took her generosity and rewarded her with dismissal." Mom tried to interrupt, but Dr. Chen held up her hand. "Madison, you're not innocent in this either. You knew Emma had paid for that house, and you never once questioned whether it was appropriate to accept it as a gift." We reached an agreement that day. I would release my claim on the house, but my parents would pay me back $50,000 over the next 3 years. Money they'd have to get by taking out a loan against the house I'd saved. Additionally, they agreed to acknowledge my sacrifice publicly at Madison's wedding. But the biggest agreement was that we'd continue family therapy. Because Dr. Chen made it clear that our problems ran much deeper than one house. Madison's wedding was 3 weeks later. When Dad stood up to give his speech, his voice shook as he said, "Before we celebrate Madison and Jake, I need to acknowledge my daughter Emma, who literally saved our family home with her own life savings. Emma sacrificed her dreams so we could keep ours, and we failed to honor that sacrifice properly. Emma, we're sorry, and we love you." It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was a start. The real surprise came 6 months later. I was working a late shift when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Emma? This is your great-aunt Margaret, Robert's aunt? We met at your cousin's funeral 5 years ago." I vaguely remembered her, a sharp-eyed woman in her 80s who lived in Arizona. "I heard about what happened with the house," she continued. "Your cousin Sarah told me the whole story. I have to say, I'm impressed with how you handled yourself." I didn't know where this was going, but I thanked her for calling. "Emma, I've been thinking about my will lately. I own a beautiful 3-bedroom house here in Scottsdale that I bought as an investment property. It's worth about $280,000. I was going to leave it to Madison because I assumed she was the one who'd need help starting a family. But after hearing what you did and what they did to you, I've changed my mind." I almost dropped the phone. "I'm leaving the house to you, dear. Someone who sacrifices their own dreams to save their family deserves to have their dreams come true eventually." 2 years later, I moved to Arizona. I work at a hospital there now, and every morning I wake up in my own house. A house with a pool, a garden, and a guest room for the family members who've learned to respect me. The final twist? Madison and Jake are getting divorced. Turns out, starting a marriage in a house built on someone else's sacrifice isn't the foundation for lasting happiness. But me? I finally learned that sometimes you have to lose your family's approval to gain their respect. And that lesson was worth every penny. So there you have it. My story of how I learned to stop being the family backup and started being the main character of my own life. Sometimes the people who love you most will take advantage of that love if you let them. But here's what I want you to remember. Your worth isn't determined by how much you sacrifice for others. It's determined by how much you respect yourself. If this story resonated with you, or if you've dealt with similar family dynamics, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and share your own experience with setting boundaries, dealing with favoritism, or standing up for yourself in difficult family situations. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And hey, if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real-life experiences about overcoming life's challenges, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. I share new stories every week about resilience, family dynamics, and finding your strength when life gets complicated. Also, if this video helped you see your own situation more clearly, please share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Sometimes we all need a reminder that it's okay to put ourselves first. Thanks for watching, and remember, you're never anyone's backup plan. You're the star of your own story. I'll see you in the next video.